ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week we are talking Edward Berger's All Quiet on the Western Front.
Hey, but before we talk All Quiet on the Western Front, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it would be a great favor to us if you just tap that little subscribe button, and while you're there, hit the little bell next to it. That way you're notified every single time a new video drops. Hey, and why don't you like it while you're there? Just a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you've been warned. James?
Okay, so All Quiet on the Western Front is a brand new adaptation of the Erich Maria Remarque book from 1929 that has just come out on Netflix. It's German language. It is Germany's official entry into this upcoming Oscars for Best International Film. But we thought this was of particular interest to us because if you go over to our Every Best Picture series back in 1930, we covered the original version of All Quiet on the Western Front, and I think we quite liked that. So we wanted to check out this new adaptation and see how they compared.
Although I need to clarify, we didn't do that review in 1930. That's the way it kind of sounded. All the way back in 1930, we reviewed.
That's it. When I was just a glimmer in my grandfather's eye.
That's it.
It was about 6 months ago, but it was 1930.
Yeah. James, I knew as soon as this film dropped that you were going to say, hey, we got to do All Quiet on the Western Front for the very reason you just mentioned, in that we had not too long ago reviewed the 1930 original version. And I was filled with a little trepidation because I thought, I'm going to love it. I'm going to hate it. I know what's going to happen in it. It's going to be depressing. All those young boys are going to die. And I'm going to spend 2.5 hours waiting for the butterfly scene. And of course, they did something a little unique. They changed a few of the narratives to give us a little bit something new, but they kept the same structure and delivered the message. And I would say they delivered that anti-war message with an even greater punch than the original 1930 version.
I think that's fair. I wonder whether some of the changes in the storytelling are actually elements from the novel that the 1930 film, the Lewis Milestone film, changed for his movie. I haven't read the book. I don't know about you, but I'm not entirely sure. But what I found most refreshing about this adaptation is while watching it, it didn't feel like a retread of the earlier film. It felt almost different enough that if it had been called something else and they'd made no acknowledgement of it, I would have come to it and gone, yes, this touches on some of the same issues and themes and what have you as All Quiet on the Western Front, but I wouldn't have necessarily identified it outright as a remake. And I think that works to the film's benefit, that it does kind of exist on its own merits, and there are many of those, not least just the sort of the scale of it. I think, like you say, I think the impact is heightened because it's using, 21st century filmmaking techniques, and I think we're used to responding a lot better due to sort of certain musical cues or certain, cinematography devices, certain performance styles that back in 1930 we could kind of hold at arm's length a little bit and be like, oh, this is quaint, isn't it? This sort of old movie that was using many of the sort of silent film era techniques, I think, still even in 1930, whereas this is so up to date, it's so new and and current, that I think it's understandable that we would respond to it the way that sounds like we both did.
I totally agree, because this movie, as much as I enjoyed the 1930 version, in this movie, I felt like I was in the protagonist Paul's shoes in a way that I wasn't in the 1930 version. My heart was palpitating at times when he was in the trenches, when he's viewing just the tragedy and the agony and the sheer destruction of humanity around him. It is hard not to feel it very viscerally. It was very hard not to feel it viscerally myself. I found it was exactly what I thought I would experience. I was going to love this movie. I was going to love the visuals. I was going to love the soundtrack. When you mentioned about the modern soundtrack and contrasting from the 1930 version, there was this hum, and there was this undertone bumming. Like, it just was the production team was able to create an experience that was not dissimilar to the Normandy landing in, say, Saving Private Ryan, where I felt like I was there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this really felt like a direct response to Sam Mendes' 1917, which obviously is, very similar setting, but told from the other side. Yeah, there is this kind of sort of incessant sort of hum, this kind of droning, sort of almost too low or off the aural scale. Yeah. So that you can't quite work out exactly where it's coming from. The score itself felt quite sort of Hans Zimmer-esque. It's almost a kind of sort of Christopher Nolan style sort of execution in it, and the score has this kind of like exactly kind of sort of drone to it, which does it feel like propellers? Does it sound like bombs, dropping, or what does it sound like exactly? It just sounds like sort of this intangible sort of relentless kind of sort of pulsating sound, which I think is entirely the point. It's supposed to sort of consume you and overwhelm you and disorientate you at the same time. So all of that I thought was really, really well done. And then the cinematography, I think, was quite extraordinary, actually. Particularly like the opening sequence where it really takes its time before dropping you right in the middle of everything. It's dawn. You're in the forest, you're watching the wildlife. Seemingly everything is undisturbed and unaware of what is going on just over the next hill. And you see something. Is it the morning mist rising? Is it smoke rising? You're not entirely sure. And then it drops you right into the middle of it. And what I liked is that the film then ends with the exact same shot.
Yes.
Because it's kind of a sort of circular narrative in that regards. It kind of ends from the exact same point of view, but now all the horrors and everything and all the senseless death that is taking place just over that rise. And I thought that was a really nice sort of bookending to it.
And I think that cyclic nature was very intentional, because for me, this is such a timeless story, because we are still dealing with rich old men who send their youngest into the front lines for their own egos. This movie, unlike many other war films, even ones that want to have an anti-war message, this really shows that it is old men's egos and nationalism, which is the murderer of hundreds of thousands. I mean, obviously, in the case of World War II, tens of thousands of young men. When I walked the Via Francigena, from Canterbury to Rome 5 years ago, I had to walk through France, and I went through northern France, and it's cemetery after cemetery after cemetery. There's the Australian cemetery and the American cemetery and the French cemetery. And there's just crosses as far as you can see. And I would stop occasionally and just reflect, and I would look at the gravestones, and you'd see, this kid was 18, this was 20, this one's 19. These were all children. And this is continuing to happen. And I think it's timeless because we're seeing it right now in Ukraine. We're seeing Russia just throwing, how many more men can we throw against for our national ego, for our pride? And this is an ongoing human issue that this film just fingers the pulse of.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you're seeing in Russia that they're extending the age limit from 16 to 60 or something, just because they're so desperate to get people, and it's causing this mass exodus of Russian nationals. And I think what's so fascinating about this is just the journey that Paul goes on, and you see him from the moment that he's saying up, and he's so fresh-faced, so innocent. It starts with a sort of similar moment, once you get through that kind of opening, and it really sort of sets the scene, where it is the propaganda machine in action, and it is these teachers, these inspirational teachers, sending their boys to their deaths, but full of ideas of national glory and all the rest of it, and pride and all of this. And you see young Paul sign up, and he's enthusiastic and excited, but then that quickly turns into absolute terror, when he's faced with the realities of it. And then by the end, he is this, emotionless killing machine.
Yeah.
And you get to those final movements where this literally the seconds are counting down until the armistice is going to be recognized, which is so frustrating in and of itself. There is, you jump away from the front line so often to these negotiations between the German and the French about this armistice, essentially the end of the war. And there's all of this nonsensical posturing about who's going to say it and who's going to ask for it and who's going to grant it. And then there's this arbitrary deadline.
Yes.
It's not just, okay, we've agreed, so the war's over. It's like, well, the war will be over on such and such a date at 11 o'clock.
At 11 a.m. Yeah.
And then, of course, what happens, spoilers for the end of the movie, is that Paul dies sort of seconds before 11 o'clock. Seconds before the ceasefire is called. And I sort of really appreciated sort of on the one hand, the organic execution of this transformation, but just the sort of the inevitability of it all, that he goes from being, yes, I want to fight, to no, I absolutely don't want to fight, to becoming just a complete sort of war machine, essentially.
Yeah. And Paul is going to die in the end, because this movie's message doesn't work with a hero at the end, with somebody going home to this movie's message is your friends are going to die. And even at the last moment, you're going to die, because at the end of the day, war doesn't have any heroes. War, we may put men on horses on statues in the front of these cities all over the world, but at the end of the day, there's really no heroes. And that's really what this message of this film is. And I love the lovely contrast between, sometimes they would show the devastation, what's going on around Paul, you're there, and then they would quickly flash to a negotiation or somewhere in the German high command, and there'd be a overweight guy in a military uniform digging into a chicken, as it's just been contrasted. These guys are starving to death. They're anything they can find, they're eating. They're so hungry. Quick flash to the military officer with the chicken in front of him, and he's swinging his wine, and those constant contrasts between what these young boys have to endure vis-a-vis these rich, pompous fools that sprout all this national ego. Like, even when you were talking about the back and forth, like, who's going to say, you're going to say surrender, you're going to agree to this. And even when they give them these terms, which I'm fairly familiar with World War I and World War II history, all I keep thinking is these terms are going to cause World War II. You're going to get World War II because of what you're doing right here. And so watching this, it was very hard to watch, but the filmmaking was absolutely brilliant. You mentioned the cinematography earlier. There's a great shot at the beginning where, even before we've been introduced to Paul, I believe, and his friends, you see all of these coffins, and the guy's just fumigating these coffins, and then they're taking the uniforms off the dead, and they're taking the names off of them. But then sometimes they forget to take a name. So when Paul gets his, I got the wrong uniform, there's another name here. That was a guy who was too big for him, or something like that. And it's like, no, you're just meat. We're throwing meat up against, we're going to throw as much mud against the wall, and some of it'll stick. Because when these guys are going over the trenches, and those machine guns are just mowing them down, and they're just going forward. And all I'm thinking, I don't think I could do that. I would just be like, get me the hell out of here.
Well, that's it. And that's kind of what we witness, is that nobody can do that or should do that. But once you survive it so many times, you just become completely numb to it, or you release the grip you had on your own life, or the value that your life holds. From the very beginning, it is meted out that your life has no value to those who oversee it, who control you, who give you orders, what have you. And I think that the transformation that occurs is the individual coming to the realization that their own life is worthless. Right. Which is I think sort of the most heartbreaking bit. But that opening sequence, towards me, I've talked about. I think I've named 3 different opening sequences now. Yeah. But let's suffice to say the opening of the movie is incredibly strong, and it really gets you into the world very, very quickly. But where you see the journey not of the soldier but of the uniform, dead bodies being stripped of their uniforms and then being washed, boiled en masse, drip dried, and then taken into the sewing rooms where bullet holes are just being sewn up, and like the names are being torn out, and they're just being handed straight back to clothe the next round of people. And you wonder what the timeline of that cycle is of those uniforms. And not only does it show you the cheapness of the individual life in the eyes of their senior officers, but also just how few or just how underfunded the whole operation was. And obviously that has repercussions in terms of what, like you're saying, what they have to eat, or rather don't, and how that inevitably, I mean, that causes the death of at least one major character, because they're just trying to steal food from the farm because they've got absolutely nothing. It's devastating from all sides, really.
One of the scenes they didn't have in this that I missed, that I enjoyed in the original, was where he goes on leave. Paul goes on leave for a week or so, and he goes back to his hometown, to the schoolmaster who had started the whole propaganda thing in the first place. And the initial acceptance of him as a hero, until he talks about the reality of it, and then they hate him for it. And to me, I understand why the filmmakers chose to not do that, because it does slow the pacing, and it tells kind of a different narrative. But to me, it was always very powerful, and something that always resonated with me as someone who, as I mentioned before, I used to be a Republican. I came from an evangelical background, and I was held up as an example, a poster boy in a lot of the churches that I come out of. And a lot of those people have rejected me now, because I've spoken, not because I'm a bad guy, but I have the ideas of Trumpism and the conflation of that with Christianity that's been so accepted in a lot of the streams that I come from. I've just merely pointed this out, and it's not like, oh, you speak from authority, maybe we should listen to a little bit of what you have to say. No, it must be rejected. And they have that wonderful scene in the 1930 version where he is the poster boy until he starts saying, hey, the war is not good, you're going to die, and there's nothing to be celebrated here. And he is vilified by the students, by the schoolmaster. And that is something that was missing in this version that I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's when the other students turn around and call him a traitor for saying those things. And you're like, hang on, I'm trying to, save your lives potentially here. But I feel that this version sort of shows rather than tells. It doesn't need to give you those kind of sort of heavy-handed bits of sort of anti-war propaganda. It's just like, if you're not anti-war by the end of this experience, then there's no saving you. Really. I don't know how significant that moment is in the novel, if it's even in there at all, or whether it was something added to that film.
Yeah,
it feels very much an organic part of the story, though. You're right, and so it was surprising that it wasn't in there. Yes, I feel it's it could be construed as being sort of a little on the nose, a little heavy-handed, and you didn't really need it. It was just a decision to let the horrors of war speak for themselves.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that they kind of created a new narrative with the negotiations going on the side?
Yeah, I did like that stuff. Actually, it reminded me a bit of like Paths of Glory. Have you seen that? The Stanley Kubrick movie with Kirk Douglas, which is same war but from the French point of view, and it's the French high command putting 3 of their own men on trial for cowardice because they wouldn't go over the top, essentially, because they questioned the orders. And you've got Kirk Douglas there as their senior officer, kind of questioning the high command, going, "What are you doing?" During a war where we are losing so many, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives, and you're going to kill 3 more of them because they disobeyed an order or perceived to have disobeyed an order. And it really does throw a spotlight on the hypocrisy of sort of the high command.
Well, they have that powerful scene right at the end when the officer, just before the armistice, the German officer, he doesn't like the terms. He wants to have a victory before the armistice goes into effect. And of course, we're going to go take this field. We're going to show the French just before this ends that, blah, 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 blah. And it's for the glory. And it's all this. And you just see all these guys going, it's almost 11 o'clock. Don't we get to go home? And of course, some guys say, no, we're not going. And they just take them and they just shoot them right there. And it was like, whoa, yeah, I guess we are going. And,
Paul doesn't make it.
But. No. And right, as you say, seconds before 11 o'clock. And it's a nameless, faceless man who comes out of the shadows and just bayonets him. I mean, it's
behind.
Similar from behind.
While he's having a kind of standoff moment where I think the suggestion is that the French soldier he's fighting, because they kind of fall into a bunker, like into an actual sort of room. And the look I got, or I interpreted the look that they give one another as, should we just stop? Yeah. We're seconds away.
Tick tock. Yeah,
just 5 more seconds. Just don't kill me yet, and we'll be okay. And then from behind, a guy that neither of them knew was there.
No, and I think that very much is the case, because the French officer that's standing in front of him almost is regretful. He's not happy with what's just happened, and the whole thing is tragic. The whole message is, from beginning to end, is this is fruitless. It's tragic. And I think every world leader that has the ability to put young people into a battlefield like that needs to watch this movie first.
I think that's an incredibly sort of smart observation. I think it really hammers home just that disconnect between those making the decisions and those carrying them out.
Yeah. And we were seeing it, as much as I hate to, bring up the Russia-Ukraine thing, but we're seeing it again. It didn't go the way he thought. Well, let's just keep throwing more young men in there. We can just overwhelm them. Just bring in more young and just keep throwing them in. Who cares if they're fully trained? Who cares if we throw enough bodies, we'll eventually break through. And that individual person is just meaningless to the high commands making those decisions. Yeah. So James, what's going to be our instrument of scoring this version of All Quiet on the Western Front?
I mean, there are some pretty grim choices, but we could go with duck eggs. They're nice.
Duck eggs. Let's keep it
a pocket full of duck eggs.
Pocket full of duck eggs. Sounds good. How many pocketfuls of duck eggs would you give our 2022 version of All Quiet on the Western Front?
I mean, I thought it was great. It's really slickly handled without, sanding down all the rough edges. I thought the performances across the board are incredibly authentic. I think it helps with a movie like this where you don't recognize too many people. I mean, you got Daniel Bruhl in there, the recognizable face in a supporting role. But for the most part, these are sort of unknowns as well from my point of view anyway, and that certainly helps. It raises the stakes, it raises the tension. You're never sure who's going to make it and who isn't, even if you do kind of know the outline of the story. Like I said, tech specs really slick, really well done. I mean, I would love to have seen this on the big screen. This is a Netflix film, and I think it did have a little sort of theatrical window in a few different markets, but unfortunately not here. But by and large, I thought it was really good, really strong. It would be interesting to see how it fares at the Oscars, because it is Germany's entry, and I'm going to give it 4 duck eggs out of 5.
I think we're on the same page. I've got 4 duck eggs in my mind as well. I thought this movie was visually stunning. I love the message as much as I despise the circumstances. It's movies like this that give me an experience where I was there. I felt what they were feeling, obviously, to a certain degree. And I love when a movie can do that for me. And so I will give this movie 4. I need to add, too, I was about 20 minutes into this before I realized, this is a German movie. I could be listening to this in German and just reading the subtitles, because Netflix naturally just put it on English for me. And so I was thinking this is an English language movie. And I think I quickly looked at Wikipedia while I was watching it to just check some names on who was starring in it. And when I saw it was a German production, I'm thinking, wait, hold on. I go to the audio, and it's sure enough, original German. I thought, oh man, I should be watching this in German, which I did.
Good thing you found out.
which I did for the rest of the film. So I needed to make note of that. But anyhow, that's James and I's review of All Quiet on the Western Front. That's what we thought. But what did you think? Have you seen the 2022 version? Have you seen the 1930 version? How does it compare and contrast in your mind? We'd be happy to hear what you had to say in the comment box below. And don't forget, James and I are on social media. So you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. And those links can be found in the description as well. James?
Yeah, let us know if you've read the original novel. I don't think either of us have. It'd be interesting to know if this is sort of a more faithful adaptation, if that sequence that we were talking about with the where Paul does go back home, is that in the book? You know, is that something that they added into that early version of the film, or you know, and took out of this version, or vice versa? Please do let us know about that. And what are your other favorite great anti-war movies? Feel free to share those with us too. But until next time,
You ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a